right, one of my most anticipated reviews of the year, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. It's been 5 years since we've seen Miles Morales. If you're watching on YouTube or a clip on TikTok or Instagram, I am in my full Spider-Man costume. Probably why my voice sounds a little bit muffled. This is my commitment to this podcast, to this review, a movie that just took every one of my expectations and exceeded it. And I have so many things to say about this movie that I even watched this movie differently. All right, before I get fully into this, I got to take off my mask because I feel like, oh, all right, here we go. I feel like I was suffocating in that, and also I feel like my voice is a little bit muffled. So I felt like I even watched this movie a little bit differently. Usually when I go watch a movie, I'm watching a little bit with my brain of somebody who is going to review the movie later. I'm looking for my angle, and sometimes it takes me out of the experience a little bit because I'm thinking of all the points I'm going to make and everything I have to say about it in the review. When I watch this movie, I will be completely 100% honest with you. The movie review part of my brain was shut off, and I just completely enjoyed this movie and allowed myself to be fully submerged in everything. I wasn't comparing it to the original. I just wanted to go in as a movie fan, as somebody who, the reason they do this is because movies like this exist. And I still stand by that is why the first Into the Spider-Verse is my favorite Spider-Man movie, because it was so groundbreaking. It took the Spider-Man formula and completely flipped it and gave us something new and refreshing. And you have a character like Spider-Man that maybe the general public has a little bit of fatigue with. Not me. I'm in a full Spider-Man costume right now. Give me all Spider-Man all the time. But you had the Tobey Maguire, you had the Andrew Garfield, you have Tom Holland. We feel like we've seen so much of the character that it's hard to make it exciting again. And that's what the 2018 version did. And what Across the Spider-Verse did was it took what made the first movie great and amplified everything to an 11. So the animation style, the storyline, the entire take on the struggle to be Spider-Man. It felt like there was so much more on the line, and it felt like this movie existed in its own world. And the entire thing really felt like a euphoric experience to me. And I'm not saying that lightly, and I truly mean that. That is how I felt watching this movie. So let's start first with what the movie is about. It picks up after the first one, but we have some years of separation. Miles Morales is more grown up now, and I've never really seen this in an animated movie. Is the character himself looks different. His voice maybe sounds a little bit deeper. And we saw an animated character get older. I can't really think of any other instance where that has been executed. So much so to the point now when I see, and I went back and rewatched Into the Spider-Verse from 2018, looking at those stills and watching that movie, you think, oh man, he looks like a little kid in that movie. And somehow through the power of animation, you have aged a character and it feels like us as the audience have grown with them. That is a feat in itself. So it's him still in high school. He is struggling to maintain the life of Spider-Man and also be a good son, be a good student. So that's where his story kicks off in this movie. But what I loved about it, and again, we'll keep everything spoiler free. I'll do a full spoiler review later because there's so many more things I want to get into. But the way the movie opens is not with the story of Miles Morales. It opens with Gwen Stacy, aka Spider-Woman. And I love their decision to do this because the first 10 minutes are completely dedicated to her and her story and quickly just establish all these things about Gwen Stacy. And they do it so well and hit you on an emotional level. So not only getting to know more about her story, but visually the animation was so different. And I think that was a great way to open the movie because it was unlike what we saw in the first movie. All of the opening scene with Gwen was almost like this watercolor, live, living animation that even the expressions that her character gave were portrayed through like bleeding colors on the screen. And there were also so many different animation elements in that scene that it was a huge flex. And that is how this movie really turned up the animation, is The first one did combine several different animation styles, and what gives the first movie its look is the use of 2D animation combined with 3D animation, and it makes it look like a comic book living on the screen. It's all the detail and all the coloring, even giving it the little dots that make it look like it's an actual comic book. That's what made the first one great. But in this one, there's even more attention to detail and all of these animation styles working together so well that in a movie where there are so many characters, there are over 280 different variations of Spider-Man, a lot of different villains. They all have their unique animation style. And myself being just such a big fan of animation, it is one of the best looking movies that has ever entered my eyeballs. And I don't think I have to make that case to any Marvel fan or any Spider-Man fan, but I feel like if some people are borderline wanting to watch this movie because you think animation means it's a cartoon, which means it's for kids, that is not the case. There are so many great movies, not even superhero movies, that I could recommend to you that are my favorite animated stories. It's just a different kind of medium. It would be like somebody saying now, who only played video games back in the day, saying that video games are just for kids. That is not the truth anymore. Video games are so much more advanced that adults are playing them. Everybody plays video games. It's not just Pac-Man anymore. That is the same thing with animation. I feel like when done correctly, like in the Spider-Man animated movies, there are so many more ways to make you invoke emotion, and I feel like it resonates more that I forget that it's an animated movie. These characters feel real to me. And something they really flex on in this movie is the frame rate. So, what frame rate is, imagine you're watching this animated movie. Animation frame rate is how fast the pictures move. So, the more pictures that change in a second, the smoother the movie looks. So, typically it's 24 frames per second. In this movie, why some characters look different, some things look smoother than others, and some things look a little bit more apparent that it's an animated character, it's because they play with all different kinds of frame rates. So some are moving really fast. So some characters are moving at 60 frames per second. Other characters are moving as little as 12 frames per second. Spider-Punk in particular in this movie, he's a character that has all different kinds of frame rates in his head, his jacket. So that's why this movie just looks so different, even more so than the original movie. So if you're a fan of animation like me, you're gonna love this one. But aside from the visuals in this movie, you look at the story. This movie has so much heart. And what I love the most about Spider-Man movies, which I believe that every Spider-Man story should be a trilogy. That's just the way it should go. The first one is the origin story. The second one I always love because it is the struggle of Spider-Man dealing with being the superhero and being the person underneath the mask. And the take on that situation in this movie was so different and so thought-provoking that I don't want to say it's the best one, because I don't think this story would exist if we didn't have all the other versions of Spider-Man. But it's taking all the things that make that struggle great and making it so much more impactful. Because in this movie, you have Miles and you have Gwen Stacy, and they're trying to save all these other spider people from this villain who goes by the name of Spot. And this movie becomes that same story of sacrifice and how do you save those people around you. And not only that, it also hits you with the love story. You have Miles and Gwen who haven't seen each other since the first movie. And now Miles is dealing with why she never came to see him. You get Gwen's version too of knowing everything that she's been through, why she decided not to go see Miles. And then you have the whole will they, won't they throughout the movie, which that is another way they made this movie different. It's not the same old Peter Parker and Mary Jane. It seems like there's so much more on the line when they both have the superhero qualities and they're both different versions of Spider-Man. I love their love story and it made me feel like a teenager again. And just thinking that an animated movie can make you feel that, I thought was really powerful. The scene that's also in the trailer, whenever they are above the city and they are hanging upside down, one of the most beautiful scenes I've ever seen in animation. And just that shot on its own, I think, is one of the most iconic Spider-Man images that has ever been created. And that's what Spider-Man Across and Into the Spider-Verse has done, is created these amazing stills. And I think those scenes are really only rivaled by the first iconic Spider-Man scene which is the upside down kiss between Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst. So when the question is, which is what everybody's been asking me, is Across the Spider-Verse better than Into the Spider-Verse? Right now, I am going to say no. The first one was so groundbreaking with the animation, with the character of Miles. It took everything that made the Spider-Man movies great and threw away all the rules. You could do anything. There's not just one Spider-Man anymore. There's not just one animation style. You can really do anything now to really make these movies fun. There was so much great humor in that original one. But out of everything, that movie had so much heart. And I think that's why it resonated so much with audiences, why it did so well with the critics, the box office. But I think when you look at the overall story, the first one just feels so much more complete. And I think about if I could only put one of these movies into a vault to be remembered forever, I would still put the first ones. They are both great in their own way, and they are both leaps and bounds above any superhero story right now. So just for that reason, if I can only pick one of these movies, because the first one feels like such a great origin story, it has its own message completely intact in that first movie. It establishes the character of Miles Morales, and I just feel that it has already stood the test of time coming out in 2018, and I still revisit the movie at least once a year, and I love it every single time. I know I just watched this movie, but based on all of the elements with the storyline, where Miles' character goes throughout this movie, and what's coming next, which is a big part of this, I feel like the first one will still stand the test of time more than the sequel. So don't get me wrong, it has me hype, it has me excited. I left the movie theater so energized and mainly relieved that it didn't downgrade, that we didn't get the second one and they missed the mark or the story not be as great. I think there were a couple moments where I wanted it to get to the point a little bit more, but I love the fact that it explored all these universes. It had time to breathe. So the part of me that just wanted to get to the action a little bit more is the only reason I felt that this one just was a little bit below the original one. So this movie had it all. It had the visuals, it had the action, it had the love story, it had more Spider-Man that you could wrap your finger around. And I think for me, who is not just a fan of Spider-Man in the movies, but also the video games, I've played the N64, the PlayStation games, the PS4 game, the PS5 game that's about to come out, I'm looking forward to, but also the cartoon from back in the day, all the other Spider-Man animated series. It's just, if you are just the biggest fan of Spider-Man, this is the one for you. This is it. But I would have to say, I'm going to have a little bit of a different scale on this movie. I'm just comparing it to every other Spider-Man movie. And for the reason that I believe that it's just a little bit below the first one. If it was any other movie, it would be a 5. But I look at Spider-Man movies like they are my children. That is how I feel about these movies, because anytime a new one comes out, it's like, how do you pick your favorite? It's hard to, based upon that Into the Spider-Verse is a 5. This is just a smidge below it. So I have to stick to that reasoning. So for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I give it 4.5 out of 5 webs.